Welcome to Rankin on Bass, an offhand joke that became a very long-running podcast. I'm your host, Mike White, and joining me is a Remulac all-star, Mr. Chris Stachiw.
Narvel the Garthok.
Also with us is the true parental unit, Mr. Richard Hatem.
I just want to groove.
On this podcast, we discuss the works of Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass, specifically some of their stop motion and animated work. And this week, we are talking about some animation, and we are talking about a couple things from 1972. There were a lot of TV shows going on then, as you know, if you've listened to the last few episodes. And first and foremost, we're talking about the 1983 pilot for the Coneheads animated show, written by Rankin and Davis, two of the original writers from Saturday Night Live, and featuring the voice cast of the one and only Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, and even scooching in there, Lorraine Newman. And then we've got Tom Davis doing a voice in here as well, sounding like he's 50 years old, but dating Connie. That was uncomfortable. Anyway, Chris, what did you think of the Coneheads animated pilot show?
Can I say I'm glad I live in a universe where this isn't a thing we had to watch more than one episode of? Because this was, in a way that the Coneheads movie, which I am a huge fan of, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, I think it's actually a pretty funny movie and a good Dan Aykroyd performance. In all the ways that's good, this is really bad. From the, I would say the ghoulish design of Beldar Conehead, he looks like a pig for no reason. Dan Aykroyd never looked like that at all. To just it being pretty much, I guess it's just the background of the Coneheads, which was kind of told in their sketches, but then is expounded upon more in the movie. So it's kind of weird. They're like doing the movie before the movie comes out. And again, if you compare the two things, this is a massive failure because I mean, ultimately, it's literally not much of anything. It's just kind of a disappointment. And ultimately, a lot of the decisions, including the voice Dan Aykroyd does, is beyond grading.
Okay, let's go through the chronology. So the Coneheads sketch is on Saturday Night Live, and that's in the late 70s, right?
77, January of 70.
That's the first one. Okay, and it's created, or is that sketch is written by Rankin and Davis, I assume?
It's a Dan Aykroyd thing.
And that's so funny because that's what I'm like,
of course
Aliens,
it's a Dan
so it's got to be
Aykroyd.
Aykroyd.
Of course.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Dan Aykroyd
Okay.
sitting smoking those cigarettes in that room going, ladies and gentlemen, do you know about aliens? Yeah, it's got to be Dan Aykroyd.
It feels like Aykroyd. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's the first iteration. Then this animated version was 83, and then the movie was 10 years later in 93. Have I got that right?
Correct.
Okay, so this was the first, like, okay, outside of Saturday Night Live, let's give this a try. Clearly, I don't know if it was supposed to, light the world on fire and end up having 100 episodes, or if it was just a special. Unfortunately, my Rankin and Bass book is over there on the shelf and I can't reach it. But anyway, that happens. The Conehead movie happens 10 years later, which I didn't see. Then 3 years after the Coneheads movie, Third Rock from the Sun premieres, created by the two people who wrote the Coneheads movie. So this is the trajectory of aliens trying to get along with humans and act all normal, even though they're here to study us and they have their own strange anti-human ways. I'll say this. I was never a big fan of the Coneheads as a concept. I never felt like it was an extremely robust comedic. Beyond them having Coneheads and sort of the, first thought theater joke of they're somewhat robotic and non-emotional, and they don't understand how we behave. The joke never went beyond that. Now, maybe it did in the movie, and I didn't see the movie, but for me, it was sort of like, the joke takes a half a step and never goes any further.
I make the immigrant crack because that is what the Coneheads always feels like to me, is it's like kind of poking fun at like the immigrant experience through the lens of whenever we're telling the story. And and in the 90s, like I will say the 90s movie is a lot better than any other Coneheads thing, primarily because of the point that you mentioned, which is the thing that doesn't take a whole lot of research. Bonnie and Terry Turner, half of the script. I mean, their names are on half of that script. So, and then they go on to make, I would say, a show that's more successful with the same premise. But it's only because of their involvement that the movie isn't exactly what the show that we watched is, which is just, isn't it weird that they don't get it? The movie's actually kind of a little bit more endearing than that. And there's actually somewhat of a character arc with the characters, which again, I don't think comes from people other than the people who worked on a show where that was the expectation. That's what they wanted to do anyways.
Well, okay, so let's jump back to Saturday Night Live for a second, and kind of talk about that. Now, there was another famous sketch that got repeated a bunch. That was about, there was also sort of an immigrant thing, but it was more pointed and it was way funnier. And it was the Festrunk brothers, the Czechoslovakian brothers.
Two wild and crazy guys.
Exactly. But that was all based on, we're from Eastern Europe, where our culture is pretty, walled off, literally. And we're picking up little stray signals from American culture, which feels exciting and colorful and sexy. And we're young men. And of course, we want some of that. So we come to America and now we're dressing and acting and talking the way we think cool Americans are talking, but we're getting it wrong because we didn't get all the information. That you get. And it's like, oh, okay, they're trying to be cool, but it's not working. And of course, you've got Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd doing it, and they're absolutely hilarious and tons of catchphrases, wild and crazy guys, and but all kinds of stuff. Anyway, that felt like, okay, I get what the joke is. Now, I would put Coneheads alongside another Saturday Night Live semi-staple, a series of sketches called the Widettes. Do you remember this?
You have to give me more than that.
The Widettes were a family with really big asses.
Oh, okay. Gosh.
That's the joke.
Yeah.
The Widettes. Hey, let's go visit the Widettes. And they all walk around and they just have these giant butts. And that's it. So it's like, okay, the Coneheads have big heads. The Widettes have giant asses. And that's kind of where the joke ends. So for me, Coneheads were always a bit more like the Widettes. Like, we have cones for heads. Get it?
But they're aliens, though.
Okay. So again, we barely scratch the surface. They have no assumptions about how humans act. They don't necessarily have a ton of expectations for their own agenda. They're just sort of here. The one thing, and I'll say, this is something I don't say a lot. Lorraine Newman was the best part of this. She never got to do anything on Saturday Night Live. She was the most underserved performer there. She was hilarious, but just didn't get a bunch of material. Here, because her character is the one who's she's more of the Festrunk brothers. She's the one who's like, I want to go to the disco and be groovy with the other kids. You're a drag, mom and dad. And then at least you get it. It's like, okay, she's learning how to be American, human, and the parents don't understand it. And now we've got a family drama comedy. And now at least there's a concept.
Rebuttal, Chris?
You have 3 minutes for rebuttal.
I want to hear from Mike.
Well, I grew up on the Coneheads, watching them on Saturday Night Live. It was one of those before they really started to take characters, for me anyway, take characters and just beat them until they were a dead horse. Just this idea of we're going to do it over and over and over again. But then I look at the appearances on SNL, and it was almost every single month they were doing a Coneheads thing. January, February, March, April, yeah, May, and then we go October, then January 78, March, May. Okay, so they're spacing them out a little bit, October, and then February 24, 79. So they weren't overdoing it, thank goodness, because I remember like the years of like the church lady where it was like, oh my God, another freaking church lady skit. Yeah, I enjoyed them when I was a kid. I mean, I was 5 when they first, actually 4 when they first came on the air.
That's about right. I think that's about right.
So, and seeing Saturday Night Live when I was 4, 5, 6 years old was, that was forbidden fruit, right? I remember seeing parts of the Conehead movie in probably 95, 96 when I was working at a cable company. And I just remember mostly when they go back to Remulac. And then I watched it for this show, The Ultimate Sacrifice, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. This animated special does not really do too much for me. I'm curious though. I wanted to go back. I was looking for a compilation of all the Coneheads skits from SNL because I was curious how much came from those versus this 83 pilot to inform the 93 movie, because there were times where I was just thinking, okay, is the whole thing of him being a repairman, was that in SNL, or is that going to lend itself in this one to the movie, or her with the vacuum cleaner? I feel like the vacuum cleaner must have been on SNL.
I think it was.
Yeah, I feel like it was as well. And, you know, the thing about the movie is obviously take the fact that they're characters from SNL out of it. And I think it's still it's a good movie. It's a good 90s movie. Like it's a good 90s family comedy.
Would you like to qualify this any further?
I don't know. I mean, there's like a very specific kind of movie.
It's a good 90s family comedy that was released on July 21st, 1995.
You didn't even watch it, Richard, to be fair. To be fair, friend. I mean, I think the problem with the cartoon is the charm of Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd is really lost when it's not actually them on the screen. And that's the problem. I mean, the two of them have some pretty great interactions in the movie. And again, you have to use the movie as the only other thing because it's the most long-form version of these characters. And I'm assuming the cartoon was going to be a thing. Like, this was an opportunity to, like, do more. And look, it's effectively the fucking Jetsons. Like, it's just the Jetsons. It's the Jetsons in the now times. Like, I mean, again, you know, or My Favorite Martian, but a family instead of just one person. So it's a My Favorite Martian family type thing. I mean, again, the story is rooted in so many other pop culture things that you can look at that were just as successful. So I don't know why it's not successful, other than the fact that they really didn't understand the appeal of the source material because it's so boring and not funny. It's not funny. I mean, ultimately, it's not even funny. There's not even a joke that lands.
In the what's weird is every other time they do anything, any other time Rankin and Bass does a cartoon, they just jam in an animal, jam in a talking thing.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Now we're doing aliens, no animals, no weird space pet. They don't have any powers. It's like, if you're going to do animation, why don't you just like give them something that's kind of crazy and fun? You're doing a cartoon. It's sort of for kids, isn't it? And yet this one plays it as straight as anything they've ever done.
It's a sitcom. It's an animated sitcom.
But it's so strange. It's like the one time they rein in their desire to have a fucking talking gecko or something, and it's the Coneheads. It's like, no, you've got aliens. Have them have weapons or a thing that does a crazy thing that gets everyone in trouble. Or, I mean, even live action alien shows do that. This one was pretty much them going mep at each other and then waiting for Lorraine Newman to go on a date. It was not. They did not take the material another step forward to humor or even adventure.
Can we point out also, and look, it works in the movie, but it doesn't work in the cartoon. In the movie, they kind of get away with abbreviating a lot of the stuff. The Coneheads are here, then they come to Earth, then he gets a job, then they have a baby. Now it's an adult, like a teenage kid. And so like the majority of the narrative takes place during you have a teenager. And so they had to get to that point because that's the expectation of the show, or the characters as they were on SNL, quote unquote. With the cartoon, they could have done something else. They could have done again, if this is the pilot for something, I don't know why they didn't tell a longer story about the Coneheads getting to Earth. Or again, it just feels like they didn't try very hard for whatever reason. Like they're treading old ground that isn't particularly interesting, because what they're talking about is just like, okay, so now it's just to the point where instead of talking about any of the interesting alien stuff, we just want to focus on it being a sitcom. And although they're going to sometimes have alien problems, but not really. Now they're just aliens part of a society, and it doesn't even seem to be that big of a deal. to anybody. And I know that in the Coneheads movie, nobody comments on the fact that they've got fucking Coneheads either. Sort of. They kind of do, but they kind of don't. But I don't know, like the cartoon feels really lazy in a way that Rankin and Bass's stuff, even the stuff that's not great, doesn't feel this lazy. This just feels like they were like, well, this is what they did on SNL, so we're not even going to try. All right. Who the hell was going to watch this? People that hadn't already seen it? Like, if they had already seen it on SNL, this isn't going to make them want to stick around because then they're like, oh, you're just going to do everything else you already did? You have an opportunity with a licensed property to do something else, and they just went, nah, not really.
Okay, so from the Rankin and Bass book, The Enchanted World of Rankin Bass, here's what it says about the Coneheads. The Coneheads is a cell-animated half-hour special that was originally meant to be a series, but the series never materialized. Quote, Tom Davis and Al Franken developed the show with Arthur and Jules, but there was some creative friction between the teams. Gee, you think? That was the show's continuity artist, Don Duga. Quote, Dan Aykroyd was very helpful to me. He showed me that the characters, when they spoke, moved in very close and spoke in your face. The recording session for the show was quite memorable. Jane Curtin brought in her new baby, and it was a family-type atmosphere with the reunion of the cast of Saturday Night Live. So, okay, we're getting a little bit of information. I think what happened is this is not a Romeo Muller joint. This is a Franken and Davis joint. So we're seeing creatively, script-wise, something that is much more Franken and Davis than it is the typical Rankin and Bass fare.
But at least with Franken and Davis, you would think that they would bring some of the subversiveness of Saturday Night Live with them. But it just, to Chris's point and to your point, Richard, just not a lot of stuff happens. We don't go beyond anything. You know, as you're talking about, like, having a space gecko or something, I'm like, okay, if they made an animated version of the Munsters, they would probably show Spot, right? You want to take the things that you couldn't do in the live action version and blow them out and make them bigger and crazier in the animated version, because you're not bound by any sort of laws of reality, much less budget. So go nuts.
So I was saying, like, why wasn't this the Coneheads on Remulac? Like,
right.
Really, like, I mean, I understand why the movie wasn't, because that would have been super expensive. And we do get to see Remulac in the movie. And, you know, it's fun. I mean, it's a fun part of the movie. The Narfel the Garthok thing is from that. I don't know. I mean, again, the movie's charming in its own way. And again, Richard, I think if you had watched the movie, you would realize that the cartoon is actually worse than it seems now. Because it's ultimately a bigger missed opportunity, because I don't know what the hell they were thinking about saying, well, let's have them back on Earth. Because like you said, Mike, if we could do anything, why would we set it back on Earth in a trailer park? Why wouldn't we set it on the planet where they're from and have, you know, this is before they came to Earth. Who cares? I mean, Lorraine Newman maybe wouldn't have had a voice to voice, but you could have brought her back anyways as whatever, just cause. Who cares? I mean, again, this is not in a time where anyone hews closely to the mythos anyways. So do whatever the hell you want, but just do the thing you've already done, but in a cartoon is astoundingly lazy. I mean, that's...
Well, the joke you mentioned about how no one notices their heads. I mean, that's another that could have been the joke of the show, that in the town where they land or in the city where they're living, everyone is sort of bending over backwards to make them feel welcome and don't mention their cone heads. Mm-hmm. And everyone, oh, you're from France. Okay. And the joke could be about Americans being uncomfortable with foreigners and that instinct to accept any sort of behavior. So then that allows them to be totally outrageous, borderline offensive, while we are all sitting around going, oh, this is delicious. What do you call this food? Oh, it's, cat vomit or whatever their fucking joke,
The joke is that they eat a lot, but nobody ever even comments on that.
There's just no point of view to the humor. There isn't any joke. It's just, they have cone heads, they're here, and they're not us, end.
There's a moment in the cartoon where Dan Aykroyd has a giant plate of hot dogs served to him, and he starts eating them, and by eating, I mean swallowing. And then he dips a brush in a bucket of orange paint, paints the hot dog with the paint, and eats it why was that scene not in front of another character for laughs?
Right.
Like for them to react to like, oh my God, he's putting paint on a hot dog. Oh, again, because the people who are writing this don't understand comedy. That's not it. I don't know what it is.
Chris, it clearly was done for someone, because didn't you hear all that laughter during the show?
Yeah, I did. You know what the problem is? This is an adult property being written by two people that do not write these kinds, don't handle these kinds of property, and frankly, clearly should never have been the ones to approach. And you know what? There's a reason Rankin and Bass never did another one of these, because they were probably, I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say, Al Franken and Tom Davis probably told everybody that they knew, don't fucking work with those assholes again. Because guess what happened? Then we have all the Robert Smigel stuff on SNL in the 90s. And that's done, I don't know who's doing that, but it ain't Rankin and Bass. So, and that's my point. Like, Rankin and Bass pissed away a pretty good opportunity here, is what this feels like for me. But I also think Rankin and Bass was the worst fit for this level of humor, because this is adult humor. Now, when we talk about what we're going to talk about here in a little bit, I think that's more their area of expertise. But even there, they can't figure it out. It's just, this is too adult for Rankin and Bass, frankly. Like SNL and Rankin and Bass, that's not peanut butter and jelly. That's like peanut butter and American cheese. Like maybe somebody likes it, but not everybody.
Well, I want to ask the question, but I know we're not really here to talk about the movie. But did the movie feel more adult? Did it sort of capitalize on the Saturday Night Live sort of edgy humor?
It's about as edgy as a 90s SNL movie.
Yeah. I don't think it was super edgy. Chris called it a family movie, and it did feel a lot like a family movie. Having the younger Connie, I think, helped, and
she's like a teenager in the movie.
Yeah, just the cast is amazing.
Oh,
because it's both old school SNL people that were on shortly before the movie came out, and then people that were on the show when the movie came out. So you're getting like your John Lovitz and Kevin Nealon's, and then you're also getting Chris Farley and Adam Sandler. So you get this whole wide range of people all at the same time. And then it was kind of nice seeing like Dave Thomas from SCTV, and Larry Newman shows up at one of the big events. And then Garrett Morris was there as well. So it was kind of nice.
Wow. You're making me want to see this movie.
Yeah.
Phil Hardman and Michael McKean is the villain of the movie.
And then David Spade is his little lackey.
Yeah, it's just the thing, like, it's a really fun movie. Like, I think it's kind of had its moment recently, because a couple years ago on Record Store Day, which ends up being my birthday every year, they repressed the soundtrack for Conan on vinyl. And I was like, I don't think people are doing this if some people aren't remembering this fondly somewhere. So, no, to your point, Mike, like, what it reminds me of is like a lot of the other kind of random 90s comedies that have a shitload of SNL people in them, like rest in peace, Norm Macdonald, Dirty Work, another movie that I love that has tons including someone we just talked about recently on the Culture Cast, Chevy Chase. Like, I kind of think of Coneheads and that movie in the same breath, or even like some of the early Adam Sandler movies. They are all very of a 90s piece. I think Coneheads is a little softer in the humor, because again, it is kind of like a alien family movie, as much as that's a thing that's ever been a thing.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're of a mind that the Franken and Davis, Rankin and Bass, hideous scientific experiment trying to join their creative sensibilities did not succeed wildly.
I'd say at all.
Yeah.
I don't think that this does this make the case for one of the worst things that we've seen?
Oh, I don't think it's nearly to that point for me.
Yeah, that Red Baron thing was pretty bad.
Yeah.
It was disappointing because of its potential.
Right.
And like you said, Chris, now that I've heard how interesting the movie sounds, I'm even more disappointed that some of that wasn't explored in this special. But okay. Just to watch something that says executive produced by Rankin and Bass and Lorne Michaels. I'm telling you, you don't see that every day.
That was odd. Yeah.
That's a match made in hell is what that is, frankly.
All right. Let's talk the Jackson 5.
Speaking of matches made in hell,
Wow.
Jesus H. Christ.
Guys, I'm jumping out front here and going to say I think it is very successful. I liked it, and I actually think it is a successful approach to the material. I'm laying it down, guys.
Yeah. Big. Wow. You want to back that up now and tell us why you think that?
Yeah, you want to continue to further string yourself up, bro?
Hey, did your ass want to cash the check that your mouth just wrote? Yeah. Okay. Let me say this. We just sat through something called Willie Mays and the Say Hey Kid. That was a special that seemed to have nothing to do with Willie Mays. Didn't seem to understand his appeal to anyone, or even what he did for a living. Okay, no, that's not true. They knew.
No, I would agree.
Baseball.
I would agree with you. I think they knew he did baseball might be the best way to put it. What he does baseball means they do not know.
They didn't exactly honor it. Okay, what we have here is the Jackson 5. Now, it has their music. Unfortunately, they are not voicing their own characters because they were busy being the Jackson 5. That's a disappointment, but it is so clearly, like, even down to the character design, they're bold enough to go, here's a picture of the actual human being we're illustrating, and now we're going to morph it into that character. So you can sort of get, that character looks different from this character, just as that Jackson looks different than that Jackson. I will accept that. You have the Jackson 5 music. You have almost a legit actual origin story that reflects reality about how they started. There was no pink snake, but
Oh, maybe later in life.
The pink snake comes later. Yeah.
The pink snake is part of the downfall portion of the story. You walked right into that one,
wow,
bro.
The elapsed time from this cartoon to the Neverland Ranch.
It may not seem like a long time, but it's just in the blink.
0.3 seconds.
Oh man.
The characters come off as you know what? I'll say this. If you've got Help and Hard Day's Night and the Monkees, you understand that when musical groups are fictionalized, there's sort of a wild and crazy, we operate by our own rules sort of tone, which this captured. They're people who are talented. They have skills. They are behaving in a semi-rational way. They sing. Diana Ross hears them, thinks they're great, says, come on back when you get a little older. They decide, hey, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Their enthusiasm gets the better of them. They mess up. Okay, that's fine. That's just story structure. And then Diana Ross goes, oh, wait, you were those kids who are really good singers. You know what? Sing another song. Do it quick. I think I can save your ass. They do it. Their own talent saves them, but Diana Ross helps because she forces her boss, Berry Gordy, or whoever that's supposed to be. I think it's based on Berry Gordy, but since Paul Frees is doing the voice, it's anyone's guess. And then they become the Jackson 5, and then they go for 2 seasons. I mean, look, of all the shows they did, this one actually went for a while, and it had actual Jackson 5 music in it, and the Jacksons actually supported it. They did not distance themselves from it. They were like, yes, this is our cartoon. We like it, and we will answer your questions. If when I was a kid, I knew who the Jackson 5 were, I remember watching this show. I remember not hating it. And that's pretty much how I felt now.
I think it's just difficult with a show like this where you've got 5 main characters and nobody's personality really comes through. Maybe Michael's comes through, but
yeah, a little bit.
The rest of them are just interchangeable. And I say the exact same thing about the Osmonds, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, you've got usually on your cartoons, you've got your 4 or 5 main characters. I'm thinking specifically of like Scooby-Doo. And each one of those characters has a very particular personality type, except for like Shaggy and Scooby are basically the same people. They both are scaredy cats. They both love to eat. But in here, it's like we don't really get like, oh, Jermaine's the this one and Tito's the this one. It's just, they just seem like all the same person, just
Jackie
heights almost.
Jackie comes across as the good-looking older brother, and he's the one who's going to go talk to the receptionist and maybe ask her out on a date and distract her while the others sneak into the recording booth. So I did, at least with his character, get the feeling that, he might emerge as sort of the romantic lead. Michael, of course, is the youngest, and he's the crazy kid with the snake and the two rats named Ray and Charles. Okay. So he's the little kid that we're all supposed to love because we're little kids watching the show. But I think you're right. And I didn't go deep enough into the show to see if we ever got to the point where it's like you said, Tito's the scaredy cat, or, Jermaine is the one who's always, cracking wise or whatever, which would have been the way to go.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that so many of the other characters are all voiced by Bob McFadden and Paul Frees, to the point where it's like, this guy sounds exactly like this other guy that we just saw 2 scenes ago.
Yeah, for sure.
They're not really mixing it up too much. I mean, it was what it was. For me, the most painful part of it was that damn laugh track and the applause that was going on. Every time they would do a song, you would get this swell of applause as if there was a live audience watching them perform. And that's kind of impossible.
It was a little weird. And I think they did it because Hanna-Barbera did it with Scooby-Doo. There was a laugh track on Scooby-Doo. And I think they looked at it and said, well, maybe this is the way to go. To the point where they developed their own laugh track. They did not use the pre-recorded one that was used by Hanna-Barbera. They were like, well, that's too expensive. We can hire a group of people to come into a room and laugh in various ways. And then we'll own it. We'll own their laugh forever.
Right. So this just existed to sell records, right? Because that's what this felt like for me, watching it now. Like it felt like the barest minimum of effort being put into everything but the part with the music. And that's a sad thing. Because at the end, when they do the music video at the end of every single one of these episodes, because that is what this is about, it's so damn apparent where all the effort went into the last 5 minutes of every episode, which is, again, I kind of didn't expect anything less, only because, again, like you just mentioned, Richard, like you said, Mike, the Jackson 5 was such a big thing and everybody knew who they were, that the expectation wasn't, what do you do when you watch the cartoon? What do? You go buy the music. That's the expectation. It's you watch the cartoon and then you buy the music. And so that's what this feels like, is just a really prolonged cartoon to get you to buy Jackson 5 music, merchandise, whatever the hell they're selling at the time, which, again, if that's all it needed to be, that's kind of the way I'm taking it. That's all the way it is. And you mentioned, Richard, they're like, it's supposed to look like Michael Jackson. The only time it looks like Michael Jackson is at the beginning when they superimpose his face, and in those music parts. Every time else when it's the cartoon, varying degrees of success. It sometimes they all look the same at some points because they're just not putting in a lot of effort, which is fine. It's the same thing with the character voices, like that, the Paul Frees just doing the same voice 4 times, like, hello, it's me, another character. Like, no.
That's right.
That's how I want him to wait to talk to himself. Yeah, like, oy.
Okay. From the book, Jack Davis did the character designs for the show. The character designs closely resemble the Jacksons as they looked then. Quote, I never did meet the Jacksons, nor did I ever see the finished product. I just did the designs from the photographs as I thought they should look, and that was that, says Davis. In fact, Davis was flown to California to work on the project, but never left his hotel room. He did all his work from production photos and videos of the Jacksons' performances. Okay, so that is the degree of effort. Some effort, but not a laboriously, overwrought attempt to render them as realistically as possible, because it's super stylized and we get that. Yes, it's for teeny boppers. What?
You get those animation cycles where it's just the silhouettes of them, and they spin around and they clap and then they spin around again. And it's like they use that so many times throughout this entire show.
It was a signature move. It's something that you associated with them. And I think, I think because they were, or at least they started out kind of like the Osmonds as a bit of a teeny bopper band. Like, this is a band for like kids, like pre-teens. There were children in the band. I mean, Michael Jackson was a child. In the Osmonds, which we're going to talk about in a second, Jimmy Osmond was a child. Donnie was barely a teenager. So, and they were aiming toward the bubblegum crowd. The Monkees were the same way. The Monkees were being consumed by grammar school kids. And it was, teenagers listened also, but they were aiming super young. So again, the fact that a cartoon, it made sense. I will say that this is not a head scratcher in the way the Coneheads is a head scratcher. This was like, yeah, of course.
That's the other thing about all of this is like, you know, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, it is the Jackson 5, but it's the Michael Jackson show. Like, the first episode has him going off on his own adventure. Like, and you know what? The person who it's noticeable that it's not the person voicing it is the Michael Jackson character. It is so apparent that he's not the one doing the voice. And it is beyond distracting because you know what? I don't know what the rest of the Jackson 5 sound like, but I sure as hell know what Michael Jackson sounds like. He's kind of like Frankie Valli. He's kind of always No, Michael Jackson has kind of always sounded in the same, like, of the same way, like just the way Frankie Valli has. Like, he has a very distinct voice. And like Michael Jackson had a very distinct voice singing. I mean, he's front and center on ABC for a reason. I mean, he's front and center on all their songs for a reason. I mean, there's a reason he had a solo career. Everything else that came after it is a problem. But again, that's what we get for having people that are human beings that make things that we like, unfortunately. I wish it had just been the Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. Just get it out of the way. Like, just do it. Because, like, it's going to happen eventually. And they kind of do it anyways by not saying.
Well, and you know, and we can talk about both simultaneously, but to move us on for a second to the Osmonds, it's funny how Jimmy Osmond is pushed so front and center.
Boy. Yeah.
In a way that's like, well, you know, Michael Jackson is the, you know, lightning rod for the Jackson 5. Jimmy is the little kid. So, and, you know, just like the Partridge Family, where the, you know, almost the younger the kid, the more the center. It's not even Donnie. Like, now we think, oh, well, the Osmonds were Donnie and Marie. Well, Marie's not in this show. It was the Osmonds. And Donnie was sort of the teeny bopper girl dream, but the cartoon is pushing Jimmy because he's the youngest. And they're like, look, we'll give him a talking pet, which we'll talk about.
Ooh.
And then the kids will have someone to connect to because it'll be like, oh, that's sort of me. And then if I was in that group, that'd be me. And I'd have a dog named Fuji who speaks in a Asian accent. Shall we say?
Russian? I mean, he sounded so Boris Badenov to me.
But it was so clear that it was supposed to be Asian. I mean, he even says it. He's like, wait, are we going to Japan? Is that Oriental? Because my dog is Oriental and I'm not getting along with him, so I don't want to go. So it's like, oh, okay, decision number one, his dog's going to talk to the audience, I guess. I don't know if it's talking to him, like Son of Sam. And he's going to talk in a Far East accent. That, I would say, is pure Rankin and Bass. And then the show is based on, and again, this sounds like a good idea, but I can only imagine, they are hired to be sort of ambassadors of music around the world from America. And they get to try. So every episode, this will be China, this will be India, this will be, you know, the Netherlands or Italy or Australia. So we're going to go and then we're going to feast upon the racial stereotypes offered up by those cultures.
Fish is out of water, bro. That's the entire show. It's like, yay. It should have been the Jackson 5 show should have been this. It should have been the Jackson 5 traveling the world.
But see, well, yeah, it could have been. It could have been. They did travel the world. They were, you know.
But then I guess you can't mine as much racist bullshit, right?
Well, but there's also, you know, Donnie gets to, he's dating an Italian girl this week. Oh, next week, it's a London lady. Thank you.
This whole thing, like, so I started off with the Transylvania episode and I just knew, like, okay, we're going to have lots of monster jokes. And it basically became Mad Monster Party featuring the Osmonds. And then I was like, should I do another one? I said, you know, I've got the one from Spain. All right. Before I even watch it, let me see if I can predict. There's going to be a lot of bullfighting, maybe some paella. And I'm just like thinking of as many Spanish stereotypes as I possibly can.
Football.
Oh boy. And they didn't disappoint, man. Donnie becomes a bullfighter and some of the brothers get into a bull costume. And I was like, okay, well, you know, should I watch the Australia version so I can see them hop around with like some fucking kangaroos and use a boomerang? I mean, it is just every stereotype that you can think of. It's like a 5-year-old's impression of the rest of the world.
London, mate. I love the India. The India episode's great. In the first 5 minutes, they're riding on elephants.
Yeah.
It's great. Oh my God, I love it. I'm glad they didn't eat monkey brains at one point. That's a low blow to a movie I like, but a low blow nonetheless. I'll go there. I mean, this is worse. This is like, I don't know, it's like that like Whitey's of the 70s racism where it's like, it's racism and it's intolerance and the characters of other cultures always look real bad.
They're stereotypes. It's
bones
like,
through noses and all. I mean, when they remember
boy.
what was it where they showed Africa? Remember one of those things was the emperor's new clothes, and they showed people in Africa and they literally had bones through their noses. Like, come on, show, like you don't have to go there.
Well, this is very much early 70s and very much Rankin Bass. This sort of like, hey, let's, like we're not coming at it with hatred, but we are coming at it and celebrating stereotypes, preconceived notions, and sort of an implied otherness and subhumanity, which doesn't age well. I'm sure barely tolerable then, unless you were, the white kid sitting at home watching it going, "Ooh, cool." They wear wooden shoes in Danish land.
But don't you know in India they use genie lamps? That's part of the India episode. It's like, what? That's not
there.
That's not even. That's the like. That stereotype is meant to be as somewhere in the Middle East. I'm assuming India with the genie lamps. Like, hey.
Yeah, that should have been my people that should have been when they went to Lebanon. Oh, right. They never would have gone to Lebanon.
And then all of the Indian characters in India look like Al Jaffe drawings, which if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. It's real bad.
Were they wearing turbans and diapers, basically?
And they had like giant noses too. It's great. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, at least the Jackson 5 show. Again, the problem with the Jackson 5 is it's Michael Jackson and everything that comes with that. And that's the kind of point of horribleness. The Osmonds thing is just like, I just don't, the premise is so not problematic, but the premise is just not really a good one, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, again, doesn't age well, but going back to your earlier observation, Chris, this was obviously an attempt to capitalize on the popularity of a teeny bopper band that Saturday morning viewers would totally recognize and totally love seeing. And these were both really popular shows. I mean, people loved this show. And the Osmonds they actually voiced their own characters. They weren't too busy.
Which I think for me is the other thing that sets, I mean, as much as I don't like the premise of the Osmonds show, at least it had them. Like the Jackson one feels flatter than it may have felt otherwise if they had just gotten their goddamn voices. At least Michael Jackson. Again, I stand by what I said. Like his voice is so noticeable and it's such a notice that he's not part of it. Like, again, I don't know what Tito and Jermaine sound like. That is of the age I am. I only know Michael Jackson, really. I'm not even a Jackson 5 fan. So,
okay, you want to hear something? You want to hear Donny Osmond talk about the show?
Sure.
Donny Osmond says, the Osmonds cartoon series was really quite a fascinating experience for me. As a young teenager, I always watched cartoons, but I never really knew how they were done. I remember going into the studio not completely understanding what I was about to do to record all of our vocal tracks, and then later on, watching this character speaking with my voice on television. I vividly remember the presence of Paul Frees in the recording studio with us. In fact, I think he took the seat next to me. When he stepped up to the microphone and did his voice for Fuji, the dog, and then a minute later did the voice for Hortense Bird, two completely different characters, I was completely in awe of the talents of this man. So there you go. It was fun. It was fun for Donnie. He seems pretty happy about the whole thing. Donnie says, I actually own the rights to the series and will one day like to put it out on home video. As far as I'm concerned, I think Rankin Bass did a lot for the Osmonds, particularly for people remembering us from the 70s. Okay.
Well, I kind of wish he would put it out on home video because the versions that we were watching were just off of YouTube and they looked terrible. And
yeah, clearly someone was recording off their TV.
Yeah, the Jackson 5 stuff, on the other hand, was gorgeous. That was all on Blu-ray. And then, the Osmonds, I don't even know if that ever came out on VHS.
Yeah, I don't know. if you watch them back to back, obviously, stylistically, they are totally from the same world. I mean, it's just psychedelic, influenced by Yellow Submarine.
I think The Osmonds is a better show because I think it actually has more fun than the Jackson show. I think there's an intent behind it of, yes, its premise hasn't aged well, but they kind of just go off and do whatever the fuck they want. And there's something that can be said for that being just like, they're going to go do whatever and get into, I mean, it is like Scooby-Doo. It's more Scooby-Doo than the Jackson 5 show is.
I'll say this. I saw more of the Osmonds, which is why I like it less. I only saw one episode of the Jacksons, and I'm giving it my highest rating.
I just didn't like the animation styles for either one of these, especially that you would get a close-up of a character head on, and they would look pretty decent. And then you would get a side view of them or even a 3/4 view, and they just looked awful. I'm like, did you guys give that person the day off or have somebody else animate this character? Because like the one I watched in Spain, it was like the father of the pretty girl that Donnie, of course, falls for. He looks great in close up. And then when you see him from a medium shot or a long shot, he looks like a monster. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Rankin and Bass's QC with their animation has never been that good. And man, at a production level like this, where they have to have a lot of episodes, it's like, oh my God. Yeah. If you look too long in the place they don't want your attention to be, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Look at the thing that's moving, not at the background of the cell where everything is just like fucking sticks and circles, because they're like, just get it out there. We don't even care. They're not going to pay attention anyways. I'm sorry. Rankin and Bass's animation, like, this is just, their animation has never been that good. I'm sorry.
Well, okay. I mean, again, I find myself in the weird position of defending some of this, but I'll defend it on these grounds. This was a creative choice. It was a bold creative choice. So this wasn't like, well, we don't really know what to do, so it looks like this. This was, no, here's how we're going to make it look.
Right.
And they made it look that way. So I totally get it, Chris. If you don't like it, I mean, that's a flavor you don't like.
Again, the effort that they put in certain spots is not commiserate with the effort they put elsewhere.
The effort, yeah, it's fucking cheap, but it's a cheap execution of a bold creative vision. When I say bold creative vision, I mean, in the world of Rankin Bass, what are their bold visions? Rudolph. Okay. Anything animagic, that was bold. That was something we hadn't seen. And that's something that we still love 50, 60 years later. That is still appealing to the eye and to the heart. Much of their other animation feels kind of reductive, almost like lowest common denominator. Here's what everything else looks like. So just do it that way. Okay. This at least felt like we're ripping off the Beatles. And if you're going to rip someone off, rip off the Beatles. And so they did. They're like, we're going to make this. It's not going to be Yellow Submarine, but it's going to feel like that. It's going to feel psychedelic. They're going to fly around and there'll be weird, stripes and colors and ever changing backgrounds, magenta and yellow and green. And it's like, okay, I mean, sit back and watch it. It looks like a breakfast cereal come to life.
Well, don't forget that the Beatles had their own animated series, which was really not good if memory serves.
Yeah, no, because they didn't even sound like them, and it's not that hard to find people to sound like the Beatles. But Paul McCartney was talking like this.
Hello, Governor. Hey, me, John Lennon. What the?
Hello, Governor. Hello, I'm George Harrison. In it, I could have done that.
As far as Rankin and Bass's animated works, I will still defend things like The Last Unicorn or their versions of the Return of the King and The Hobbit.
Those are long form, though.
Yeah, well, I like that.
But still.
I mean, even like Frosty the Snowman, the animated version, I think that those look decent. But yeah, you get into this, I mean, again, 1971, 1972 was a freaking crazy time for these guys. I'd say even going back to like 69, because they just had so many things all coming out that, the QC just was not there. I did not find Kid Power, which was the other show that they had coming out in 72, along with Festival of Family Classics. And Festival of Family Classics kind of put the end to all of this stuff. As far as I know, they wouldn't do another animated thing animated TV show, I should say, until 1985 with Thundercats. But yeah, these like Jackson 5, Osmonds, what I've seen of stills of Kid Power, they all seem very similar animation style and not really one that I care for. I think Kid Power looked better, but that was because it was Topcraft doing this rather than Alice and Bachelor, which was, they also did the Tomfoolery show, which I wasn't able to find either, but they did both the Jackson 5 and the Osmonds.
To your point, the Festival of Family Classics, I actually don't mind the animation style in that. I actually think it really works in that. And I can't figure out for the life of me why, other than I think the framing device helps the show out immensely. Because I did watch a couple of those and I was like, okay, this is like, what are those books called? Like animated classics or not? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Golden
like,
books?
Yeah, but like that for like Frankenstein and stuff, where it's like a comic book retelling of Frankenstein, or it's like that, where it's like, okay, here's the Puss in Boots fairy tale or Cinderella. It's like, okay, you know what? It's like 25 minutes, fine. And I don't know, like I don't expect as much from that as I do, I guess, the Jackson thing. But I mean, again, I think it's still kind of reductive to just say, well, this shit's free and we can make it for free. So let's just do it because somebody's going to watch it. Some little kid is going to watch us do 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Like, oh, okay. Like, of all the things that really don't, like, again, like, it's weird because, like, they had a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea part of that show. And it's like an hour long. Again, it's very weird because that in and of itself, you could do a whole show on those, on those. But I actually didn't mind those as much as one might have thought compared to the lack of a talking animal in the Jackson 5 cartoon.
Chris, let's just be real careful when we start throwing around. You could do a whole show, do a whole podcast on that show.
Yeah. Haven't we learned our lesson?
Where we're in the mess we're in.
That's why I did it, just for you, Richard.
Dare you. I remember Kid Power. I'm looking at this but it's the way you remember a dream. It's like, yeah, it's super familiar looking. I have a feeling, but I don't remember anything about it other than it's a group of kids.
They must be powerful.
But I'm not saying we need to watch it. I don't know where we are with all this. Are we? Was this our last show?
No, you would know if it was our last episode.
We have 3 more episodes to go. So yeah, we will be back next month, back in Christmasville. We're going to be covering 3 things here. We're going to be covering The Stingiest Man in Town, The First Christmas. Oh, I'm sorry. It's only 2 things because the second one has a subtitle. The Stingiest Man in Town and The First Christmas, The Story of the First Christmas Snow. So that was the title.
I can't wait for that second one.
It sounds great. It's just about snow. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I want to thank Abby Stabby for our artwork as well as the Great Octopus for our theme music. And before we go, I want to ask Chris, what are you working on these days, sir?
Nothing that can't be found anywhere other than weirdingwaymedia.com, which is where you can go to find all the things that I work on. It's like a real hard double negative I put myself into there. I got myself out of it, though.
I thought he was going to say nothing that concerns you, Mike White.
That's what I thought he was going to say as well. Richard, how about you? Or are you going to be secretive?
Well, I'm really not doing anything. I'm on strike. The rule is when you're on strike, you're not supposed to work for the studios that are being struck. So that's easy because I was out of a job when the strike began. So, all right, I was already on strike. That's how dedicated I am to the union. Then there's this other question of, well, can you write your own stuff? And then it's like, well, of course you can write your own stuff because you don't, you'll write something, but you don't know if you're going to sell it. And, people, it's pencils down, but still. Well, I'm not doing that either. So I am doing nothing, which makes me, again, big union supporter and also very, very lazy. And you know what? When it's time to go back to work, I hopefully will return refreshed.
What about you, Mike?
Oh, just doing my usual. Like you, Chris, everything's available at weirdingwaymedia.com, including the show that I put the most work into, The Projection Booth, which is the weekly movie podcast. So come back here once a month for Rankin Bass. Come back to The Projection Booth every week for more fun discussions of movies and no weird animated thing. Well, I guess we have done a couple weird animated things. We just talked about Wizards recently, so that was a lot of fun.
Bakshi.
Little bit different than this stuff. Little bit harder edged, I would say.
The fact that Ralph Bakshi and Rankin and Bass worked together and didn't kill one another is more surprising, given that they couldn't hack it with Al Franken and Tom Davis.
Well, Franken just had his mind on the White House and just couldn't get it into Remulac mode, I suppose. Well, until we come back to talk about the stingiest man in town and the first Christmas, the story of the first Christmas snow, be sure to rate and review the podcast wherever you get it. Tell your friends, tell your family, and please stay weird.